Akhetaten's Gates, Chapter 32. I sat before my vanity, letting my handmaidens do up my hair all nice. It had been washed, and I wanted to forego the option of a wig. I was one of a handful of Egyptian women without a shaved head, opting to take great care in preserving a healthy head of hair. As a result, it took a lot of time to get it just right. "Oh my!" "Oh my?" I gasped. "What is it?" "No, don't tell me I'm going bald!" My handmaiden laughed. "No, my queen, you have a gray hair. But it's not a huge matter. Some bull's blood can cover that." "Age is being mean to me," I whined. "Do not fret," the other maiden laughed, being so bold as to yank the hair out. Of course, I let out a yelp. "You will always outshine Egypt." I smiled, rubbing my head. They were such kind women. I was suddenly distracted as Akhetaten invited herself in, making her way to my bed, and curled herself up. "I don't feel so good." I turned around to look at her. "What's wrong, hun?" "I feel all crampy." I frowned as I thought on that. "Perhaps you are going to menstruate." It wasn't as far-fetched as it seemed. I had heard of a handful of children menstruating at 9. Akhetaten was a very swift developer. She had already started to develop very small breasts. A period didn't seem like it would be odd. "Maybe," she whimpered. "Do you want me to call Khufu to see if he can do something to help?" To that, she gave a little painful nod. I wasn't too worried. As crazy as Khufu was with diagnosis, he was very good at keeping us all well, as the current medications allowed. But as a mother, I would rather ease her pain and dismiss it as PMS than to acknowledge the notion of any danger. In all honesty, several people within Akhetaten had started to take ill recently. It was under control for the time being, but there was a rumor that a plague could be ready to strike. Of course, to avoid being a paranoid mother, I tried avoiding jumping to an insane conclusion about this matter. No mother wanted her baby to suffer. Expeditiously, Khufu was summoned. Much like the late troll nurse, he was crazed, but confident as an old but able individual. As usual, however, he began to spout an irrelevant story, understood to no one but himself. I believe this one was about a baboon that drank beer from an oasis. "Does that mean she's okay?" I asked. "I am actually not quite sure yet," he admitted. "Let's just make her comfortable, and I'll keep checking on her until I can find something definite." "Do you think it could be serious? If it is something, should I keep her isolated? Could she pass it along to her sisters?" "Let's not jump to conclusions," Khufu assured. "It may be something she ate, or it might be menstrual cramps. I'm not sure yet, but I think when I do another examination later, I'll be much clearer on what might be bothering her, if it isn't already cleared up by then. I should likely alert Seppenptah and Hara then. I will not let her return to her lessons until I am sure she is well again." "Seppenptah has a substitute, Majesty," Khufu stated. "He has taken ill recently." "That's frightening and eerie. I want someone to keep an eye on Akhetaten at all times. I'd rather be paranoid and safe than negligent and sorry." I let out a heavy sigh. Seppenptah was never one to get sick. I didn't even think he knew how. "It is so," Khufu replied. "But I will tell Hara of the situation. He often worries if things will fall out of routine. That, and you know he quite likes timid little Akhetaten." "Oh? Yes, do so, Khufu," I said absently. "Thank you." Year 11 of Akhenaten's reign had a vast amount of evolution. It was, the year, coming to a grand close. Ottonism was still in full swing, now with myself capable of a vocal part. Weekly chariot processions brought all of Akhenaten's residents to the road to behold the royal family. To add some flavor, and break a stream of monotony, Akhetaten and I had taken up a hobby of chariot racing. It was entertaining and shocking to the citizens. It was known that I was one of the few women in Egypt who knew how to drive a chariot, and well. But to race them was absolutely unheard of. To make matters more appalling to an old-fashioned individual, a woman was racing a chariot against Pharaoh. No need for bragging. Sometimes I won the chariot race about the city. Sometimes Akhetaten won. This competition was always in such good nature and brought a strange sense of interaction between the royal family and the subjects. Akhetaten had become busy with several projects. Aside from the rigors of court, religion, and political matters, he had been secretly building a second palace. Although how one could secretly build a whole palace in the same city is beyond me. But believe me, he did it. This palace was a present from himself to his most beloved Akhetaten. She was his firstborn, and they had a special bond that was unique between them. He would never be so tactless as to say so, but I had inklings that she perhaps was his favorite, holding that ever-special place in his heart, reserved for the firstborn and father. She would quickly be considered a woman and deserved a separate palace of her own to, in a sense, rule semi-independently. He had lied about the building's nature, claiming it was a new temple. He was eager to reveal the true nature of his gift, and I couldn't blame him. From his bedroom chamber, out the window, we could see the project in the distance, surrounded by scaffolds and busy laborers. Tea had come between us to lean on the sill on one occasion where we were looking out upon it. We both looked at her, a little confused, but not really too surprised. This was Tea, after all. "Mother, is something wrong?" "No, I'm having a great day." "Ooh, let me declare a holiday," Akhetaten teased. "Oh, hush," she replied as I stifled a laugh. "Look, that loony doctor's here now." Sure enough, Khufu and Tepi were escorted in, and they all prostrated before us. Through the days, Akhetaten's condition had fluctuated, concerning and confusing me and some of her closest servants. Eyes had been on her constantly, and perhaps now Khufu could give us an answer to our concerns. "Will she be all right?" I asked. "For now," Khufu said solemnly. "For now?" Akhetaten repeated. "I'm afraid we have some troubling news about her condition," Tepi said seriously. "It's rather urgent, so I felt it was only right to escort him and to be present when he gives his diagnosis." "Then be out with it," he demanded. Both of them lowered their heads shamefully. A brief silence hung over us before Khufu finally said, "She's pregnant." "Pregnant?" T squeaked as our jaws dropped in utter disbelief. "Pregnant? Our precious 9-year-old Akhetaten? Who is the father? This cannot be so," Akhetaten roared. "It is so, my pharaoh," Khufu replied. "As to the identity of the father, that is something that we do not know." She would not say. "How could something like this happen?" I gasped. "A darkness," T stated. "There was always someone with her. It was a nurse. It was a sister. It was a parent. It was me. It was servants. It was teachers. It was... well, it could be anybody in the palace. It could also be any visitor to the palace who happened upon her, if they were that bold and lucky. Someone has taken advantage of her and has likely been able to demand her silence." "Someone," I thought aloud. "I'll kill him with my own hands," Akhetaten growled. "Painful death to Hurrah!" "Hurrah!" from Tepi, T, and myself. Akhetaten stormed off, most certainly to bring to reality his threat to kill Hurrah with his bare hands. I chased frantically after him. "Akhetaten! Akhetaten, wait! Stop!" We passed Akhetaten, who spun around as we walked by, as if moved to do so by the force of our movements. She was confused and a little disoriented, it seemed. "Akhetaten!" I called again. "Mom? What in the world's going on?" "He's going to kill Hurrah!" "Hurrah? No, Dad, stop!" Akhetaten shouted, now joining me in my pursuit. Outside of Akhetaten's chamber was Hurrah, leaning against the wall, looking rather pitiful. He had just come from the room, having visited with her after Khufu and Tepi had left her. Akhetaten was upon him before he could even blink, snatching him up by his throat and lifting him almost completely off the ground as he slammed him hard into the wall. You! How could you? After all I've done for you, you repay me like this? I'm sorry, Pharaoh, Hera choked out. Why? Why would you do something like this? She's just a child, Hera. How could you? It's not what you think, he replied, tearing up. It looks quite obvious. Do you think that we could not see? You were the closest man to her. You took advantage of her infatuation with you. For her to turn up pregnant, I have a clear opinion. Hera's tears streamed down his face. No, it's not like that. I'm not the father. Do you expect me to believe that? I've never been with Akhetaten, Your Highness. But punish me if you wish. I have done nothing to or with her. But I wanted to. Akhetaten lowered him a little, but his gaze froze Hera in his place. You better explain yourself. Damn it, talk! Stop it, Akhetaten, I pleaded, as Meridaten and I tried to pull his hand from Hera. Put him down, Meridaten shouted. Explain! Hera coughed as his throat was freed, and he stumbled a little, using the wall as a crutch. He took a few deep breaths in his own despair before he finally was able to speak again. I am in love with Akhetaten. I have been for a while. I knew that my status would make it impossible and politically incorrect for us to be a couple. We whispered to each other often, just talking about the fantasy of being able to freely be with one another as simply a courting couple. My intention was to one day ask and plead for her hand in marriage, despite our status difference. I know that I am not worthy of a princess of Egypt, but I could not ignore my heart, and she seemed quite taken with me, as you have said. I fantasized about the very small and virtual impossible possibility that we could in fact marry, and that we could one day have some sort of simple family. But I am not a desperate man. I swear it. I would have waited, and only would have acted with your blessing. I would have done whatever it took to win your favor to that extreme. I would not ruin it by this stupidity. There is more to this than you know. It kills a piece of me to hear that this has happened to her. But I swear to you, the hand laid upon her is not mine. I will kill more pieces of you if you do not then name the father, Akhetaten threatened. That is, if it is not you. Hera, do you know who could have done this? I asked. Hera, Meridaten chimed in. If you even have a hunch, please say something. Hera looked away, sniffling and covering his face with his hand. He shook his head, letting out a sob. He desperately tried to bring himself together enough to speak. I don't know 100% for certain. I've never caught them. I've never confirmed it, but I can only think of one other person, but I had nothing to prove it. I had nothing to confirm my suspicions. It was just this gut feeling. I thought maybe I was just being unreasonable and, I don't know, I just... Speak! From Akhetaten. Stop it! I scolded frantically. Sepinptah. Sepinptah? Akhetaten gasped, backing off and stepping back in utter belief. How could that be? Did you have something to do with that? If you knew something, why didn't you say anything? Who would have believed me? Hera replied. I was trying to find proof. She just seemed different. I knew her so well, so I noticed it. But she never said anything about it. It was this odd feeling I started to get from him. And it was like a bunch of voices telling me so. But I had nothing to offer to say it was so. A man of that status, his word against some poor, uneducated boy? Who would you have believed? I hate that it had to come to this before I could finally get the proof. Voices? I whispered. Had Aten spoken? To Hera? I had nothing to do with it. If it was happening, I wanted to stop it. I never wanted anything to happen to Akhetaten. Nobody, other than her family, of course, wanted to protect her more than I did. If I knew for certain, I'd have wanted to kill him myself. Was it the voices alone that made you feel that way? I asked him. No, Hara paused a moment. It's strange. It's strange. Septim Bata had one day grown swift to dismiss me from Akhetaten's lessons. Who needs a painter when you are learning about politics and mathematics, right? But he is the only man, other than myself, who has ever been able to be left alone completely with her. And he was alone with her during the lessons he taught her. It was something odd. I mean, why couldn't I at least keep her company while she learned? Was I that much of a distraction? Shortly after that, Akhetaten had some subtle changes in her demeanor. I supposed I prayed for some type of answer to rationalize it. I heard the voices speak to me, giving me a terrifying answer, but it sounded so crazy, not exactly something you would tell someone else. Hearing voices in your head doesn't prove someone is doing something wrong. But even if that were so, I said, why would she not say something? Why wouldn't she tell you? Why wouldn't she tell any of us? Akhetaten seemed to pale and give a gulp. She tried. What? We gasped. Akhetaten glared at her. What do you know of this? Well, if something like that was happening, you know that he would likely tell her to keep it a secret. Maybe tell her lies to convince her that if she didn't, bad things could happen. She's not the brightest girl, being so young, but one night she came into my chamber. She asked to stay with me, afraid to be alone. I thought that maybe she was just having nightmares. She had started to say something to me, but she never followed through. Perhaps she was afraid or embarrassed. I'd have killed him myself, Hara whispered. I will kill him myself, Akhetaten roared. No, Akhetaten cried out, grabbing his arm. You can't! And why not? Septim Bata, he died this morning, she said quietly. That was what I was coming to tell you. Silence. It was an unsatisfying silence. Was this a coincidence, or had Aten punished the man to lay malicious hands upon its princess? Unable to say anything else, Akhetaten slipped into Akhetaten's chamber, scooped her up, and held her close to his heart. All we could do now was watch. The end of year 11 moved into year 12 of Akhenaten's reign. It had been 3 months since the news was broken to us. Poor Akhetaten was terrified and traumatized. She seemed almost catatonic for the most part, alive and existing, but only just barely. She responded so little, if at all, and became a blank, mute vessel. The lights were on, but nobody was home. Still, we spoke to her, hoping somewhere in there she could hear us. She would sit staring into nowhere, yet always facing the sun. Perhaps subconsciously, she was reaching out, pleading for Aten to help her. Perhaps it spoke to her. She was alone inside, unaware of her unborn child, her sister, the compassionate Hara that never left her side or her parents. Word had not gotten out by the graces and might of Ti, Tepi, and Ramose. Obscurity was a heavy veil, an enigma was a double-edged sword of safety and chance. Though I said nothing of my own feelings, I felt a sick knot in the pit of my stomach. Maternal worry was a part of it. Political stress was another. I had countless things on my mind at all times and felt paranoid, as if my world would crumble piece by piece around me. Would we know the euphoric, nostalgic happiness that we once had? Perhaps I was faced with a reality, a humility that I had almost forgotten. All good things come to an end, and all creations on earth were vulnerable, and not even I, the object of affection of Aten, was immune to such disasters. It had come in ripples thus far, but the ripples would eventually lead to a great epicenter. It had not come as of yet, but as the ripples grew closer and closer together, the blows would become heavier. Akhenaten paced about the outside of the birthing room. He had been inside, but the ordeal sickened him and was just too much for him to witness. It had been a very long time since I had felt this helpless. He whispered prayers as he paced back and forth. A loud scream pierced through the wing, causing him to have to lean against a pillar for support as he covered his ears and clenched his teeth, pushing his eyes shut. He desperately began to pray some more, louder now, in hopes to drown out his daughter's cries. Hara had already broke his tolerance before this point. He sat in the corner in the fetal position, rocking back and forth on the floor. Men. What good were they? However, to say that I was not affected in any way would be an untrue statement. I was very upset. I was frightened. No child so young should ever have to go through such a terrible thing. The birth, in any part, was terrible to behold. She was so small and so frightened. All I could do to hold myself together was to remember her innocent days. Oh, my poor baby Akhetaten. A grand cheer came from the midwives, causing all of us to turn towards the entrance as T flew out. A boy! A boy! Akhetaten has given birth to a son! A boy? A royal princess had given birth to a son? How wonderful! I could already see a light of opportunity sparkling in Akhenaten's eyes. It was a brief moment of cunning. I knew immediately what he was thinking. This incident had been kept quiet, so if he claimed paternity, this boy would be seen as his son. He would then have a son, an heir. He would have a crown prince. If he had that, Kia would not come. Oh my God, how could we? How could we think of political underhandedness and opportunities at her expense, and at a time like this? Our daughter had given birth. She needed us now. So, as if Hara, Akhenaten, and I all had the same thought at the same time, we rushed as a wave past T and into the birthing room at Akhetaten's side. Meridaten was already inside, as she had been standing with T to assist her sister. In her arms, she was holding the baby boy. Akhenaten pushed everybody away to be close to her. Akhetaten. Daddy, she said weakly. It hurt. It hurt a lot. I know, he whispered. It's over now. Don't worry any more. Daddy? Yes? Will Aten be angry with me? Will it hate me? He nuzzled and kissed the top of her head. Aten is incapable of hate, Akhetaten. It will always love you. This is not your fault. I'm sorry. Me too, Akhetaten. Me too. I love you. Like Aten, that will never change. Your mother and I, Meridaten, T, Tepi, Hara, we all love you. You will never be alone in this. She gave a weak and pale smile, laid back, closed her eyes, and fell silent. Lifeless. A painful and sudden shock shot through the room, shrouded in a veil of disbelief. No sounds came. Tears fell, but no sounds could be squeezed from our bodies through tightly held breaths. It was Hara that was the first, letting out a cry. No! No, Akhetaten, no! Don't do this to me! Hara! Meridaten scolded. Keep yourself together! She was so like T. Even in moments such as this, she held her wits. We still have a baby to tend to. Hara rushed over and took the baby from Meridaten. Of course, the baby. It's not mine, but... Akhenaten turned away, putting his back to them. I peered over to him with a touch of concern. Akhenaten? I cannot see him, he said shamefully, walking away in that silence. He won't do it, T said, stroking the head of my deceased daughter. He will not claim the child. Then let me, Highness, Hara pleaded. Please, this is all I have left now. I know I'm not of royal or even noble blood, but my love for her was true. Please, if he will not see the child, then allow me. I approached, laying eyes on my first grandchild. A grandchild, at this age. It couldn't be helped now. He looked so pale and so weak, struggling with every cry. He was so small, such a pathetic sight. Hurrah, I don't think... The child won't make it, T said bluntly. Your intentions are noble and appreciated, but it will do you no good to get attached. Hurrah lowered his head. Then for what little time is left. Do as you please, T said, stroking Akhetaten's face. Just sickening. It almost feels like that bastard murdered my grandchild. If he were not already dead, I'd put him to a slow and painful death. Damn him! Damn him! Damn Seven Bata! Akhetaten took Akhetaten's death extremely hard, and once the realization finally sank in, so did I. For a good 24 hours, I felt numb to the whole fact. But out of nowhere, I had fallen to my knees in a heartbreaking and paralyzed wail. My baby, my princess, my daughter, my Akhetaten. She was gone. Gone! That bastard killed my baby! She was only the gateway to a string of disasters that followed within the following months. Rippling. It made me so violently sick to live. Facing reality was disgusting and overwhelming. As we had suspected, Akhetaten's son, of whom Hurrah called Ani, died shortly after his birth. This was too much for young Hurrah to bear. In a horrid sense of despair, he took his own life, wishing more than anything to return to the girl he could not have and the child he could not claim. In the afterworld, all would be put to right as Aten had intended. Those were the hopes that he left this world with. I could only hope that was so. I felt as though a curse had fallen upon the royal house. A dark, heavy cloud, and not just over the palace, but over the entire city of Akhetaten. Within a few short months, so many deaths had occurred due to plague, and of natural causes as well. It had decimated the population of the city by a whole quarter so far. Sicker still was I, not of an illness, but having to face day in and day out with the deaths of loved ones so close to my heart. They felt like personal attacks from old, offended gods, finally growing tired of Aten's games. Neferneferure was the next member of the royal household to fall victim, and shortly after her, Setepenra and Akhetaten. Both were the youngest of my children, not even having the chance to live any sort of life yet. The gods were cruel. Midway through the year, death also took hold of Neferneferutin and several other of Akhenaten's sisters. It was a nauseating experience, and it felt like everything was crumbling around us. Akhetaten seemed to fall into a sort of crazed insomnia. He was devastated and terrified of so many people of the royal house dropping like flies. Being no better off, I could offer him no comfort. The citizens were becoming restless and frantic, feeling completely helpless. All my husband had left was Akhetaten, Akhetaten, and myself to hold close to him. Ripple. A grand surprise was to be offered to Tepi for his many years of loyal service to His Highness above and beyond the call of his duties. The celebration that was to hopefully bring a sense of peace to my husband's heart and a sense of hope to the court never occurred. Only partway through the planning, it was dropped when the morning came of Tepi's death. The only sense of pride and closure resting on our souls was that this was not a death caused by the plague that had run rampant in our streets. Khufu's hypothesis was that Tepi had been taken by natural causes. Perhaps it was a heart attack or stroke. He was an old man, after all, having spent many years of loyal service to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh before him. Sadly, too, Khufu joined the toll of those taken from this world. But even this was only the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. The most painful injury landed upon my husband was the day that he lost the most powerful woman in his life. Her death. Early one morning, handmaidens, as they had done every day for decades, had gone to tea in order to prepare her for the day's rituals. What they found was a sleeping body, stern and stiff. She had died in her sleep earlier in the night. I had to at least be thankful that her passing was a peaceful one, in contrast to so many. But as one could expect from the king of the mama's boys, Akhenaten didn't take the news of it well at all. I had never seen him so frantic and unorganized. All the calm and majesty that he stood for shattered all about him as he fell completely apart. He was reduced to sitting in a corner in the fetal position, hyperventilating. At that point, I would not have put it past him to stick his thumb in his mouth and start sucking on it. This, however, thankfully, did not occur. I, along with several other servants, had quite a time trying to calm him down to a manageable level. Akhetaten, Ramose, and I fanned him, trying to talk him into a calmer state. What I would have given for a plain brown paper bag. Who am I kidding? What I would have given for a Valium. What am I going to do now? He finally cried out. I have never been without my mother to be my backbone. She is the one who held Egypt together. She is the one who gave me confidence. She's gone. How can I go on? Father, stop, Akhetaten pleaded. Since relocating to her own palace, she felt it more appropriate to act as an adult, despite her still young age. She would not want you to carry on so. She would want you to stand strong, I chimed in. Be as if she were with you. Hold her spirit close to your heart and soul. You can't fall apart now. Father, you can still go on without her. You still have Mother, and you still have me. We can be your backbone, and it is our duty to be so. I hugged on him, something he seemed very grateful for. Akhetaten followed suit. Akhenaten, go and rest. You have hit your limit. We can see it. And it's all right. Your mother was important to all of us. Perhaps even the road to our success and the voice of wisdom. Whatever waits in the afterworld, I am certain that she will be taken care of. She was one of the greatest queens of Egypt. Akhetaten gave a small laugh, hoping to break the tension. Knowing her, she'd strike fear into any netherworld enemy. She may even take command of it. He quieted, wiping his face dry, and finally had let out a pathetic little laugh. She would do something like that. Let us tend to the temple today, I said, already hearing the crowds outside the palace gathering along the king's road to migrate as a mass outside the sanctum of the great Aten temple. No, he replied, forcing himself to his feet, using Ramose's body as a crutch until he felt sturdy on his own 2 feet. I had been hiding in the darkness of my own despair for too long. I had been far too mediocre. Let Aten shine upon its son and prophet, and his beloved wife, and his princess. Oh, I wish a man would learn to trust women's intuition. So much trouble could have been avoided. I just had a feeling deep in my gut that there would be some trouble that day. The ceremony of worship was the same, though heavy tension polluted the merry praise of light and life. Perhaps the irony was just too sharp, given the number of deaths was in the year. Akhenaten, I wish he had listened to me. He was in no position to do much of anything as of late. The morning's blow, however, made him sink further into this melancholy enigma of a being, placing him in one of his dangerous moods, overtaken by an overwhelming amount of pressure and brooding. Despite his best intentions, he was just not ready to hear the thoughts and opinions of his subjects. He stood before the people who had gathered outside, raising his hands high. "O great Aten, hear the pleas of your son and his people. Bring to them great blessings, as only you are capable." "How about giving back our old gods?" a scraggly old man near the front shouted. Akhenaten cast a venomous glare in his direction. "You dare say what?" "This plague is your fault," he continued boldly. "Amun has had enough of this heresy. He is putting an end to it, and all those who are loyal to it. Repent, people of Egypt, grovel before Amun and his pantheon of gods, and pray for his mercy and forgiveness. May he save our lives." Akhetaten and I shot our eyes to Akhenaten. Oh, this was bad. Very bad. That was the face of a crazed man, enraged. I could almost hear the twang of his mind as it snapped. "An end?" he chuckled eerily with a wicked smirk. "To Aten? Never! Know this. I care not what Amun thinks. He died with Amenhotep III. Do you really think Aten can be put down so easily? Aten has shown long before Amun, and shall continue to do so centuries afterwards. Perhaps this curse of plague is not a fault of mine, but yours, and the fault of people like you. You dare live in the city that Aten has made, and both believe and outcry such blasphemy? Perhaps then Aten grows angry and offended. Perhaps it is punishing me for tolerating it for so long. Oh, great Aten that rules all from the heavens, I understand you now. I shall declare no more tolerance. Amun shall be destroyed once and for all. He and any other old, useless, worthless, obsolete gods shall be erased, and his images shall die. His name, his image, and his statue shall be destroyed. Anyone found to be worshipping any of the old ways, they will be brought to me and punished. I am Pharaoh. I am your king and your God. If you shall grovel and quiver in fear, then let it be before me. You should hope that Aten can forgive Akhetaten's people for this horrible offense. Indeed, those gathered quickly dropped to their knees to grovel and quiver before the king. Merodachon reached out to touch my arm and leaned over to whisper in my ear, "Mother, is he going to be all right?" "Hush," I urged quietly. It'll be all right. He's just very upset. Hopefully some rest is all that he needs." Unfortunately, rest did not quell my husband's fury. He remained as good as his word. The following morning, a military attack was launched from Akhetaten to the lands of Egypt. They were armed with spears, hammers, and chisels. No opposition of any kind would be tolerated. When the great army descended upon the old capital of Luxor, the name of Amun was removed from every temple, every wall. All images were maliciously defaced. They had even been so bold as to remove images of Amenhotep III, believing that even the man that had sired and named him heir to the throne offended him so as well. Akhenaten's intentions were vicious and malicious beyond any comprehension, and more so than anything he had ever done in the past. As it stood, there was no room for mercy. The trouble had been taken to such an extent that even scaffolding was built within the temple of Karnak to scale the mighty obelisk erected by the majestic Mayat Kara, Hatshepsut, where the name of her creation from the seed of Amun himself was vandalized. Yet still, the insatiable rage of my husband could not be quelled, bringing forth a fear not only from his people, but from myself as well. His patience grew so thin that there was no way for anyone to avoid his wrath and disapproval. Even I was incapable of being near him, for even I seemed to offend him in his insane campaign. Truly, I did not wish to be beside this man, this alien, this pod person that had taken parasitic host and control of my husband's body. Taking refuge in the queen's chamber was not enough to ease his unruly fits either. I finally made the decision to escape from the palace and take refuge, therefore, in the North Palace that was now the home of Merodachon. With me, I brought Akhetaten to protect her from anything Akhenaten might do. Merodachon was only too pleased to grant me hospitality. The North Palace became my home for the duration of that whole month. Not once had Akhenaten come for me. It saddened me that, perhaps, in his blind fury, he hadn't even realized that I was missing. But it would inevitably have to dawn on him sooner or later. And it did. Merodachon and I were resting peacefully beneath a gentle shade in her private gardens. It was here that Akhetaten wandered safely through the fauna, and where my eldest daughter and I enjoyed a quiet game of Senet. Need I say that I was a marvelous Senet player? However, I also have to say that Merodachon was an aggressive player, and currently winning. I was preparing to make my next move, but was unnerved by a dark shadow looming over the board and me. I gulped loudly. I didn't even have to turn to face him. I knew it. Akhenaten had come. He had found me. "What are you doing here?" I asked dryly, trying to suck up some nerve. and being snobbish enough to not give him the satisfaction of my gaze as I moved my piece on the Senate board. I certainly missed him. There was no mistake about that. But I feel I was rightfully still angry, and was not ready to see this man, if he was not the man I married. His face softened, and he held out his hand. Nefertiti, come home with me. Oh, aren't you so bold, I scolded, looking him over a moment before swiftly swinging my gaze away. Why should I? Did you only just realize my absence? Do you not expect that such a thing alone would bring me great offense? What made you realize only now, rather than a month ago? Did a sudden erection bring you back into the real world? I scowled. I'm sorry, but if that is what it took, then be gone, and simply be better acquainted with your hand, for your queen shall not return like some lowly dog to your bed without being properly appeased. Nefertiti, I miss you, he frowned. I am sorry for neglecting you. I want to make it up to you. I want to make it right. How can I be so sure? I replied. You've changed far too much, almost completely. I can't even feel confident to say that you are the man that I fell in love with. He was scrambling for something to say. I didn't want to change in any way that displeased you. I wanted to become a strong and able ruler. I never meant for it to jeopardize us. I am, in many ways, I realize, a weak man. You outshine me, Nefertiti. I'm sorry. And this rampage of yours? Ended. Done. Come home to me, Nefertiti, please. I miss you in Akhetaten. I miss Akhetaten. You are the only family I have left to hold close and dear to my heart. I want my family back, and you standing confidently and proudly by my side. I gave a sigh, standing and putting down my Senate piece. It was my turn, as Akhetaten casually made her move as her father spoke. I approached him, standing now beside him, away from the table and board. He flinched a little, unsure if perhaps I would strike him. People have been talking, Akhetaten. You've been named a rebel at best, a heretic at worst. He lowered his gaze shamefully. I know. I have heard that one going around. He cautiously reached out for me, but I pulled back. I wasn't quite ready for him yet. Where is he? Who? He asked with confusion. The king I married, the man I loved, the father of my children. Past tense? He asked sadly, looking away. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes before bowing before me and kneeling in surrender. What is it that you want from me, Nefertiti? Huh, I replied, looking down on him. You haven't asked me that in a very long time. I'm asking now. I am nothing without you. There is never a time in which I did not have a woman by my side. He paused, gasping as he came to a realization. To protect me. I never had any confidence in myself, and always sought the approval of the woman in my life. My mother, my long late grandmother, Utemia, my eldest sister, Siramun, you, my wife, even my strong-willed Princess Akhetaten. I am easily intimidated, and I fear other men of power and strength. I hide behind women. All of you had those things of which I lacked, the strength and independence. Look upon me for what I really am, Nefertiti. I am a coward, as I have always been, as I have been since that day when you first looked upon me in that lush green commonplace of your birth, just outside of Memphis. As I had done always, I am looking for a shield behind my beloved. I reached down and took his face in my hands, turning his gaze up to see me. Don't make excuses any more, Akhetaten. Just live. Tell me what it is that you want to say. Right now. He looked deep into my eyes with a great sincerity. He took my hand and kissed my fingers gently. I love you. You are my life, my passion, my soul, and my very reason for living. I am nothing without you. I gave him a gentle smile. That is all that needs to be said, then. I bid him to rise, and allowed him finally to hold me. I could feel a heavy tension in him be released, as though he had forever been holding his breath. As for Akhetaten, she gave a small applause. "Oh, finally, you two!"